Indian traditions of translation. Translation, a day-to-day affair in India. While much of the post-structuralist discourse has cited translation at a remove from the antiquated notions of gradation, transparency, and synonymy in multilingual and multicultural India, translation has been nothing less than a way of life for centuries. Tejaswini Niranjana rocks the bottom out of the West laments over things lost in translation by foregrounding the post-colonial theoretical agenda, focusing on the need to make sense of subjects already living in translation. Bilingualism or multilingualism, that too devoid of the notions of mutual psychological animosity or cultural otherness, is invariably the hallmark of the linguistic competence of every Indian, and many a time it obviates the need for translation felt by the monolinguals. Such polyglottism has brought about the development among Indians of translating consciousness, which perhaps accounts for the progressive, non-essentialist and reader-empowering practice of translation in ancient and even modern India. Translation or transcreation. The territorial apprehensions implicate in the Western appellation, translation is significantly absent in its Indian counterpart, Anuvad, with distinct temporal underpinnings, which deports repetition of Vedic textual enjoining with different wording. The repetitive explanatory, illustrative, corroborative and interpretative connotations of the term Anuvad reveal that to Indian society steeped in oral literary traditions of Smriti and Shruti, differing versions were the norms rather than exceptions. Chaudhary, 2010. Thus, in pre-colonial India, liberal and liberating practice of translation has led to innumerable inventive reworkings of Ramayana and Mahabharata in Sanskrit as well as in other bhashas, with appreciable thematic and ideological shifts ranging from convolutions in the storyline to swapped roles of the characters. It might sound scarilegious to a European ear, but every retelling of the great epics were or are heard, read and enjoyed by its audience with the same sense of appreciation, reverence and awe with which a Western reader would approach an original. Tulsidas' Hindi reworking of Ramayana and Janeshwara's free Marathi translation of Bhagavad Gita, the epitomes of the characteristics Indian tradition of translation. Another shade of subversion, though in a different context, can be seen in the way Shakespeare's plays were translated in regional languages in late 19th and early 20th century. These translations were essentially transcreation inasmuch as they radically Indianized Shakespeare's plays in terms of plot, characters, place and time, and even genre. Bhartendu Harishchandra's translation of The Merchant of Venice is a case in point. Not only thus, Bhartendu changed the names of the central characters, but also the binary of racial animosity from Christian Jew to Hindu Jain. Furthermore, translation Shakespearean tragedy had to undergo conceptual overhaul in addition to the linguistic and cultural one. The genre of tragedy, being unknown to Indian mind, had to be given a happy ending by the translator. In other words, Indian translatorial sensibility always envisaged a symbiotic relationship between the mother tongue and the other tongue, the original and the translation, a mutually enriching collaboration based on affection and care for both the languages. Bhartrhari Sphota and translation. Bhartrhari, the eminent Sanskrit linguistic philosopher, posits Sphota as a kind of mental perception, a revelation of meaning in a flash consequent upon the hearing of speech, sounds, nada. The theory answers the question, how does meaning happen? Through a very thoughtful analogy of the reflection of moon being caught on the surface of the flowing stream of water. Though the reflection is that of a steady object of substance, it catches the movement of the water and quivers. This analogy posits that meaning, reflection, floating on the flowing sequence of sounds, language, doesn't exist as positive presence but as an absence of it. Furthermore, this absent meaning can legitimately be modified by the vibrations of the target language in which the act of translation seeks to recode it. Needless to say, Sphota theory must have shaped theory and practice of translation in ancient India. Such an avant-garde formulation finds resonance with Derrida's questioning of the absolute relationship between the sign and the signified that was so totally espoused by almost every philosopher from Plato to Saussure. Theory of Auchitya and Translation. Avdesh Kumar Singh has mentioned an approach to translation which draws on the theory of Auchitya, Propriety, propounded by Kismendra in 11th century. In his book Translation, Its Theories and Practices, 1996, he says that Auchitya should mean propriety in the selection of a text for translation, of methodology and strategy used for translation, and of placing the text in proper perspective so that the source writer's text indented, not merely articulated meaning, find its proper expression in the target text. As is seen earlier, the exercise of translation is not free from its politics and has ideological underpinnings. Many a time, translations are undertaken to corroborate or subvert a particular ideology. However, Auchitya plays an active role at times in the strategy or method of translation as well. It plays a major role in decision making during the act of actual translation. See Torres' Descriptive Translation Studies. Sri Aurobindo's Theory of Translation. Sri Aurobindo, 1872 to 1950, was a nationalist, poet, philosopher, yogi, and a translator, all neatly rolled into one. Sri Aurobindo, 1872 to 1950, was a nationalist, poet, philosopher, yogi, and a translator, all neatly rolled into one. His insights into the act of translation are expounded in his essays on translating Kalidasa, on translating the Bhagavad Gita, on translating the Upanishads, freedom in translation, importance of turn of language in translation, translation of prose into poetry, and remarks on Bengali translations. In his essay, The Interpretation of Scripture, Aurobindo has mentioned 3 levels of a complex cognitive exercise through which a human being interprets a text, that is, nama, name, rupa, form of meaning, and swarupa, essential figure of truth. He further juxtaposes these 3 levels of the text with the 3 levels of consciousness found in humans, that is, superconscience, mind, and subconscience. In the light of this view of Sri Aurobindo, it can be said that a text can be analyzed linguistically and intellectually at the 2 levels of word and its form of meaning, but at the highest level, the analysis can be done only intuitively, and perhaps at this level, the actual translation takes place. Gopinathan. In his essay on translating Kalidasa, Aurobindo expects a spiritual evolution in translator to get at the highest level of meaning. He says, even after the translator has decided on the right form for his text, there will naturally be no success unless the mind of the translator has sufficient kinship, sufficient points of spiritual and emotional contact, and a sufficient basis of common poetical powers, not only to enter into, but to render the spiritual temperament and the mood of that temperament. At closer analysis, one finds that though based in the realm of cognitive psychology and mysticism, Aurobindo's theory doesn't go much beyond prescriptions for being a good translator or translation.